I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyourear for details.
Well, welcome to this, and the people that Liam Gallagher calls the Peter Cook and Dudley Moore of music journalism, who've just published a book called A Sound So Very Loud, which is a kind of revolution in the head that tells the inside story of every song that Oasis recorded. Ted Kessler and Hamish MacBain, very nice to see you both.
Hi, Mark.
And you.
Great to see you. Ted, look, the Pete and Dud of music journalism. What did he mean by this? And which are you, Pete or Dud?
Well, I have to go on sizes, so I think just based on the size, I'm going to have to be Dudley, unfortunately.
Dudley.
Yeah, and Hamish is definitely Peter Cook. I don't know.
Do you mean anything by that?
I think that maybe they were okay to go to the pub with, and that he's had nights out with us that have been enjoyable, perhaps.
I mean, as my dad said to me yesterday, and it's funny Ted pointing out that it was Dudley who ended up being vastly more successful than Peter by the end.
Yeah.
Fine, that's good. So look, you were very different ages when you first heard Oasis, and I wanted to ask you about this. Hamish first, I think you were 15 when Oasis arrived.
I turned 15 exactly a month before Supersonic, the debut single, came out in April 1994. Yeah, so I was, I mean, there's a bit in the book where I'm talking about the first time I interviewed Noel, and he actually says to me, "How old were you when Definitely Maybe came out?" And I said 15, and he just went, "Bastard," because it's just such a perfect album to like a kind of roadmap when you're 15. It's got all those really, universal sentiments and dreaming about being something special and going out and just all the kind of standard teenage concerns. I feel very lucky to have had that album bestowed upon me when I was in my formative years. So I mean, I was 15, perfect age really. Just a little bit too young for Nirvana, and then that came along just at the right time.
And Ted, you were what, 25 when the record came out?
I was 25 years old, and I was working. I'd been at NME for a year, which had been my dream since 1980 when I first bought a copy in Woolworths on Edgware Road. And I'd always dreamed of working at NME, and I'd been there for 1 year. And in that year, I'd sort of carved a niche writing about, I suppose, that kind of progressive techno music like Orbital and Ultramarine and the Warp Record stuff. And I was looking for a band that I was looking yesterday at what the covers were before the Oasis first cover. And it was, they went first of all, they went The Death of Kurt Cobain, which felt significant, obviously. Then it went The Levelers, Snoop Dogg, then Absolutely Fabulous, and then Oasis. So that, at that time at NME, we were waiting for something to arrive. And I think Oasis were that thing. They had purpose, and they had a manifesto, and they were totally different to anything that happened for about 5 years since the Stone Roses. And I was very pleased they turned up. Immediately could recognise that they were going to be lots of fun.
Well, the idea of having an absolutely fabulous cover does send out a slight panic signal, doesn't it? We're desperate. Fish were casting around desperately.
I mean, it was kind of desperate. We were looking at something. I mean, Ab Fab, that was for me and Nadir working. I mean, I was really despondent that was on the cover, I remember.
So why do you think then, Ted first, why do you think that they... that it was them, that it wasn't, I don't know, Supergrass or something. Why was it that they connected on such an enormous scale commercially?
Well, I mean, obviously, the first thing to say is the songs were very, very good and very direct, and straight away they were saying something that other bands or other records were not saying. They were saying, the first single is Supersonic. I need to be myself. I can't be no one else. It's quite a good intro. And then just the very message of you can have it all, but how much do you want it? That no one else was saying that. But previously we'd had grunge where people hated themselves and wanted to die. And here was a band saying, no, we don't want that. We want to live forever. You can go out and have a good time. You might not have any money, but you can go out and live your life. And I think that struck a chord of a lot of people. And Noel wrote a good riff, and they were just very, very personable and funny and perceptive in interviews in a way that no one had been probably since, I don't know, I can't really think. I mean, if you think about the previous year's guitar bands as well, like Blur, for example, they'd released an album called Modern Life is Rubbish. That's the great British guitar band. I don't think people want to have records to say that modern life is rubbish. They want stuff that's saying modern life is brilliant. You can go and have a good time. Doesn't matter what your personal circumstances are. And I think Oasis reached for that, and that connected with a lot of people. That's my feeling.
No, that's good. Hamish, what do you think? That kind of that level of optimism was certainly a big part of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think for kind of pop historians, it was almost perfect. As in, you had Kurt Cobain releasing "I Hate Myself and I Want to Die." I think was the last recorded Nirvana song released, and then his suicide came, and then Oasis just arrived pretty much within weeks of that. And so you had this real fast pendulum swing where suddenly they're just talking about escapism and living life for the moment and wanting to be. I mean, it's hard to put across. As a teenager, I was kind of deeply obsessed with the music press for about three years before they came along, and bands just seemed, they just were. All the bands that were in it, bar perhaps Primal Scream and a couple of others, just seemed, the idea of rock stardom just seemed very naff, really. Rock stardom was Genesis or Guns N' Roses or, In Excess or that kind of thing. And so anybody who got any level of kind of commercial success or whatever kind of balked at it and shied away from it a bit. And I just vividly remember seeing this interview they did on a TV show called The Ozone, which I'm sure you remember.
I remember it, yeah.
And they were actually being interviewed by Zoe Ball, who was wearing a very natty Adidas top and a beret. And she interviewed them in a hotel room, the idea being there were loads of stories about them trashing hotel rooms. And Liam just said, I want to be a big pop star. I want to do loads of people's heads in. I want to sell loads of records, and I want it, and I'm not embarrassed about it. And it just felt so different to people from that world, because they were, at that point, they were an indie band, really. They were from, they were signed to Creation. Creation Records was very, very alternative, really. I mean, they had hits, obviously, but it was very much from that world. And straight away, very quickly, you started to feel that they were going to connect with an audience much, much bigger. And the other thing I think is that they had grown up with the Smiths and the Stone Roses, who both, when they got in the music press, they used it as a performance. So it's just like you've got a tape recorder rolling in front of you, just show off and say funny things. I guess that comes from the Beatles were obviously fabulous at doing press conferences and stuff. So, yeah, I think that
and another thing that must have been part of the appeal, I always imagine, was that most rock groups kind of before that, there was an element of being dazzled by these people and thinking they're doing something I couldn't do. They've got a musical capability that I couldn't match, or there's something about their stagecraft, whatever. But I always thought what was attractive about Oasis was that you kind of must have looked at them and thought, anyone could be in this band, really. You know what I mean? These are really simple songs. There's no stagecraft. When Noel played a lead guitar solo, I remember when I went to see them just before the first album came out, and Liam just sat on the drum riser and next to can of Stella, and I thought this is absolutely fantastic. And the clothes they wore, they wore the same clothes on stage as they did off, really. All must have been attractive.
Liam is one of those kids, who just had a talent for he could wear like a really, really terrible jumper from Marks and Spencer's in 1993, and really horrible, cargo pants or whatever, and somehow he would just make it look really cool. And you'd go out, if you were 15, you'd go out and you'd buy a similar looking top, and you'd look in the mirror and go, yeah, I just look like I'm off to clean the bathroom or something like that. So they did have that. I mean, Liam was just this incredibly charismatic thing. But yeah, I take your point. I think the stagecraft, I interviewed him once, and I did talk to him in detail about how that came about, that stillism, as he calls it. And he just said that one night he just was, tired or whatever, and just stood still during one of the guitar solos. And somebody afterwards said, that was brilliant. You looked amazing and all this. And he just said, I can do that again for you.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah.
That suits me.
I think with the others, they were just concentrating too. I generally think that Grigsy and Bonehead needed to stand still and concentrate on playing their instruments, because this was not easy for them to do.
Yeah, they're often just looking at the fretboards, and they just sort of puzzled, furrowed
let's
brow.
Just do what we do in rehearsals. In the rehearsal room, let's just stand and concentrate, that we won't make a mistake that way. I think that's the key to it.
Well, I mean, there is a quote from Liam in the book from an interview I did with him where he says the rule in Oasis was you could do at most a foot tap. Anything more than that, and you were getting fucking zapped. that was the policy, basically, is stand still.
Foot tap. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
We've come a long way from Queen here, haven't we?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Ted, what did you think when the group split up, whenever it was, in 2009 or whatever? And people took sides and just thought, well, obviously Noel is the one who's going to be the success story here if they're both going to have separate careers. And then there was a kind of shift in power, wasn't there? And Liam's commercial status just grew and grew and grew. And did that surprise you in any way?
It wasn't immediate though, was it? Because I think, the first Noel album sold 1 million copies and was hugely successful. And Liam's first thing with BDI was not successful. It took a little while. I think the key in the shift was when Liam realised he could do Oasis songs, and if he went out and performed Oasis songs, there may be a market for that, and so it proved. And also he hired professional songwriters rather than he hired people who could do a good Liam Gallagher. And so he had that material, plus he worked out that he was the voice of Oasis. So without him, Oasis didn't really exist, because he could sing the songs like nobody else could. So he went and played lots of classic Oasis songs, and that connected lots of people who were desperate to see Oasis.
Well, it's a sort of Pink Floyd parallel, isn't it, really? That everyone thinks, well, that Roger Waters is the guy who wrote all the songs, and therefore he's, but of course it's the person who sings them, and the guitar sound or whatever is the thing that's the signature. And once you've got that, you can convince people, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're always just at a huge advantage when a band splits up if you're the singer, because that's 70% of what people identify with the song. So it's the same thing with the Stone Roses in a way. Like, everybody expected John Squire to go on and become this guitar genius solo artist, and Ian Brown to kind of flounder. And then I think John Squire started doing some Stone Roses songs and singing them, which was a bit weird. And then Ian Brown then went out and did a whole set of Stone Roses songs, and it was just euphoria because it's the closest you're going to get. And the same thing with Zeppelin, I think. It's always the same.
When they split up, your little press release with the book, Hamish, says that you had a ringside seat of the breakup. Were you actually there? Where was it? Was it the Rock Insane Festival? Was it near Paris? Was it? Were you actually there?
Practically, I was not at Rock Insane. I was on my way to the second night of V Festival, which would have been the last British show, which got cancelled because Liam had laryngitis, or depending on who you believe at the time, was hungover. And then I had a flight booked to Milan, which was the last show of the tour, which was a week after Paris, and I didn't end up going to either of them. So, yeah, I had a ringside seat for a show that didn't quite happen.
I was on that final European tour for a couple of nights in Amsterdam, and and you could tell that they weren't really speaking with each other. Everything was set. Liam in his own dressing room. They never crossed paths. Noel socialised separately. You could tell that they were on a quite thin ice, and it was. But we still had a night out, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I saw them a lot on the last kind of run of shows, and yeah, it was very separate. But the thing is that wasn't especially unusual in the last sort of decade of Oasis. Like that, there'd been huge fallouts on previous tours. There was the one where Noel walked off the tour in the middle of Europe, and they flew a guy out to replace him for some shows, and then he rejoined in the UK. There's obviously the famous one that everybody knows about, where they did the disastrous gig in Los Angeles in 1994, and he went off on his what he describes as my fucking Hunter S. Thompson thing, and disappeared to the desert somewhere for a few days. So it wasn't especially unusual. And there was a part of me, I mean, I was working at the NME at the time, and I think the news broke it was the weekend of Reading Festival. So I was working at Reading Festival, and although I was the office person, as I'm sure you both know, you used to have a group of staff on the site and a group of staff in the office. And so I was getting an early night, because I had to get in at 7, and my phone just started ringing at 11 o'clock at night. And I just thought it was whichever writer off his face ringing me going, "This band are amazing, listen to this." And someone said, "No, it's Oasis split up." And my reaction, the first call, was just, yeah, I mean, this just happens. It just happens. It happens every tour or so. Don't worry about it. I'm going back to sleep. And then someone else rang, and it was the BBC saying, "Have you got any comment or whatever?" And at that point I thought, can I ring you back? And I better just check out what's going on here. And yeah, and then I think the statement came the next morning. And it did have a more degree of finality of it than it had in the past. And that was that. It's I do wonder whether, I've always wondered whether in the last days of Oasis, the fact that Noel had his blog that he was doing, and Liam had just started on Twitter. And so they were able to just sort of put stuff up immediately. Well, I do feel like if that hadn't existed, then they would have had a fight, and someone would have gone, "Look, calm down, go to your room." And then there's a good chance that they might have just... That's
an interesting point. So what you're saying is that spat just happened in public, and therefore it's much harder to walk back from things like that, isn't it, than if you've had a conversation in a room that no one else has heard.
Yeah, I mean, they were just things like they would... they did a show at the Roundhouse, and I remember Liam was really shouting and being irate, and then the next day Noel put a thing up on his blog on the Oasis website, just going, "Oh, I don't know what was going on there. He must have been on his man period or something like that." And then the next day, Liam responds on Twitter, and you're just thinking, "Oh no, this is awful," because it's now all in public. So I don't know. I feel like that may have played a part. You get to a certain age, and you just think, I can just do without this, perhaps.
No, you can totally sympathise.
Yeah,
but all three of us were involved with the music press during this time, and I was, involved with Mojo, I think, and Select, and I felt that a lot of my affection for the group was to do with the fact that they sold publications. That when I heard the sound of Oasis, I could just picture copies of magazines flying off what we used to call newsstands, and that affection for them, just how commercial they were, how brilliant in interviews, was a big part of my fondness for them. You guys must have felt the same. I mean, Ted, you were at what? You were at the NME for that period, really? I mean, as you were saying earlier on, it must have been a godsend when they arrived.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, though, because at the start, it was easy and fun. You could get lots of interviews with them, and they'd always sell papers, and it was great, and they really wanted to be involved. But as they got more successful, there were more layers of management, and there's more layers of people you had to talk to, and kind of it became such a chore getting any Oasis, and there was so many people trying to get some Oasis because that was the only thing that actually lifted any magazine whatsoever beyond the normal uplift. And when you got the material, it was beautiful, and you always were guaranteed a big sale. But actually, negotiations for an Oasis interview went on for months, and it was painful. After about 96, 97,
It did actually. I sympathise with that.
It was very, very difficult until about 2002, and everyone sort
The difficult press people.
yeah. But but I mean, obviously, as I was saying, but they're world class interviews. I think they're the best in class as well. They're just.
But the thing that struck me was that they were spontaneous and they were funny and they were really honest and they were incredibly controversial. I mean, Blur is a good example. Blur were reasonably commercial in the magazines that I worked on. But if you didn't like Blur, you weren't remotely interested in reading anything about them. If you liked them, you were in the deep end. Mm-hmm. But with Oasis, absolutely everybody was captivated. Because if you didn't like them, then whatever you would read would reinforce all the reasons why you hated them so much. And you loved the fact that they were just having a go in a really ruthless way. A lot of other groups. That was just attractive and entertaining, wasn't it?
And they're also very perceptive. I mean, Noel in particular was very perceptive. You know, he could, and he also knew there was a limit to what he could say. Obviously, he said one or two things occasionally which went too far, but his range of perception was really, really impressive and always very funny. And he didn't think about it beforehand. It was off the cuff and very eloquent, and just a godsend in particular. Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people who really, really don't care for Oasis musically. But the minute they saw a magazine with them on the cover, they would go out and buy it because they were a fan of the interviews.
Absolutely.
There's, I think, Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the journalist Peter Robinson who did a very funny tweet where Oasis had an album out and he said, I see Noel Gallagher's put an Oasis album out to promote his latest round of interviews. And it did sometimes feel like that, but they just did that. It's there was an interview with Noel in his Squire in his solo years, and I think the guy said it's hard to put across just how unbelievably pleasurable it is for a journalist to interview someone who actually enjoys the process of being interviewed and actually
so true
leans into it and is gets to just say what they want. And
so true, and also so attractive that they're not going in there with some prepared line that they want to put across that they think might end up on the cover or might be part of some kind of organised strategy they've worked out with the rest of the group and the management or whatever. He would just be riffing off the top of his head. Do you remember that time that there was a possibility he might get cancelled? Actually, I think, Hamish, you wrote about this. It was the time that he talked about Jay-Z's appearance at Glastonbury. And basically what he was saying was, look, Glastonbury's a rock festival. And I don't know if this kind of music, as a headliner, it fits in quite as well as rock music. And this was completely kind of misunderstood to be a sort of racist, kind of anti-hip-hop statement, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was one of the first examples of something like that happening that I can think of. Obviously, now it happens all the time. And by the nature of the way things work on social media and the way, the newsline culture and all that kind of stuff, people are a bit more careful about what they say. But that was the first time. I mean, that to me just felt like him doing what he always does, which is just being amusingly mean about everybody all the time. And it was a very odd thing to watch that blow up I was at the Jay-Z show, and to hear the clip coming out over the PA and like 80,000 people roaring, and then Jay-Z comes on with a guitar and plays Wonderwall and all this kind of stuff.
There's a terrific clip of him soon after that, which you will have seen, obviously, where I think he's at some event or screening or something like that, and he's interviewed by various people, and they ask him about it, and he said, well, I from now on, I'm just going to say that everything's amazing.
Yeah.
When they ask me, because otherwise I just get into trouble, and they keep asking him all these questions, and he just says, it's amazing. It keeps us up for about 3 or 4 minutes, completely straight-faced. It's hilarious.
But you know what the best thing about that clip is, Mark, is that he does it for about 3 minutes, and then someone asks him a question, and he just can't help himself and just answers.
Yes.
Starts being really outspoken again at the end.
Yes, he cracks, doesn't he?
So he just can't help it. But they are just, they are very, very funny people. They're just very, very funny. I think a lot of that comes from, where they grew up and that kind of patter that people have. But it also comes from the Smiths. I think the Smiths were very performative in interviews and understood the value of, showing off, basically, and knowing that you're funny and just saying funny things. And as you say, they were very divisive. So you had three groups of people. You had people who loved them, people who loved reading the interviews but didn't like the music, and people who hated them but wanted to read I don't know of many other bands of that era who people dislike so viscerally. As in, if you told, there was definitely a period of time where if you told people you liked Oasis, they'd be like, why? Whereas if you said, I don't know, Elastica or whatever, they would go, oh, right, cool.
Fair enough. That's true. It's divisive. Absolutely. It's like a political allegiance. How can we be friends if you like Oasis?
Well, yeah, it was a bit of that, really. I mean, there definitely was a period of time where it felt like that. It did feel like that for a little bit. But yeah, those people would still read the interviews because they wanted ammunition, I suppose.
You've both obviously interviewed them many times, actually, but there must have been moments, Ted, when you were interviewing, when a bell went off in your head and you just thought, this is fantastic material. This is a cover line or whatever. Can you think of things that might have happened?
I think maybe every time, but in particular in '97 when I went to interview them for the Do You Know What I Mean? Return with Do You Know What I Mean single, and Noel compared Oasis to God in the interview, and we did it with a little wry smile and raised his eyebrow, and he knew it was
always a good idea. Always a good idea.
He knew, it's like I just asked him, do you think, would you compare yourself to that? And he said, well, I think we're more important than going to do 10 Hail Marys on a Sunday. And I think that was a bell. That was a definite bell, and it kind of rang for about 4 or 5 days afterwards in the tabloids.
Hardly completely original, but it's good.
It wasn't original. He knew that. I mean, obviously, we knew that.
No, obviously. Another fond reference to his main influence.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was a fond reference as well. So that was one. Then I think much later doing Liam when he returned in 2016, and he returned in a real vacuum of interviews, and it was very hard to get anyone to say anything. It was very hard to get interviews, in fact, for Q in 2016 with big stars. You get medium stars all day long, but it's quite hard to get a big one. And he came back for his first interview for like 3 or 4 years, and every line was just a number one single of quotes, and the bells were ringing constantly in my head, like, this is the best. And the uplift we got at Q from that was just enormous. I think we almost doubled the sale that month.
Incredible.
And I think
still like that now. His tweets now, just even yesterday, they was just saying extraordinary things every day. He says something absolutely absurd,
Brilliant. I mean, his tweets.
But it's just very, very entertaining.
I mean, it's an incredible kind of strategy that he's hit upon, whereby he gets up at 5 a.m. and just says morning on Twitter, and then fans start asking him questions like, is it true that this is happening or whatever, and he just replies to them all. And I'm sure he hasn't designed it like that, but then of course all the news bods get in at 9 a.m. and they go, oh great, here we go. Liam said the rehearsals
now we've started.
Yeah. Liam says the rehearsals are terrifying or whatever, and off you go.
I mean, yesterday he woke up at 5:30, sent a tweet saying big announcement at 6, and people were going crazy. What's the big announcement? And the announcement at 6 was, I work out.
I work out. 6:30 it said I work out, and then he did something very rare. He does actually. He apologised. I don't think he meant it, but
probably not sincere.
I don't think so. But he meant it that he'd upset everybody. No, extraordinary. Yeah. When I interviewed Noel, just again, I think it might have been just before the first album came out for Mojo. The thing that struck me was that I'd never met anybody who was so honest in his responses. Yeah. And I asked him about the songs, and I said, look, I'm older than you, and these songs seem really familiar to me, and they just remind me of certain things I've listened to in the past. And he went through song by song on the songs on that first album. He said, well, that's Nick from the Beatles, that's Nick from the Kinks,
Yeah.
Nick from ABBA, that bit comes from U2, that little bit is T-Rex, obviously, that's Crowded House, and these are the groups that I want to steal from, and I'm looking, and I said to him at one point, I said, do you mind if I publish this? I mean, because it just seems really contentious. He says, no, great, no. And later on, he was sued, I think, by Neil from the Ruttles, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Neil Innes, yeah.
Neil Innes over. I can't remember the song now. Was it
Whatever? And then
that's right.
To be an idiot. Yeah.
And he loved that, and he said, "Well, I'm hoping that Paul McCartney might come and get involved in the case. It'll bring me more publicity, And I just admired him for doing that, And I was interested in reading your book that Bonehead constantly gets quoted as saying that when he hears the songs for the first time, he thinks these are incredible. I've never heard anything like it. Whereas, in fact, they were massively stolen from things that were very familiar. When you first heard them, you two, did they seem familiar to you? I mean, I'm much older than you, so obviously I knew all the references.
We see, this is the thing. This is why I was glad I came to it at 15. I mean, obviously now I'm a withered old rock hack and I know everything about everything. But at the time, I mean, I remember going to see them the first time and they finished with I Am the Walrus. And I didn't even know I Am the Walrus, really. That was how little I knew. I was just starting my musical education or whatever and just starting to, delve into the Beatles and the Stones and all that kind of stuff. And then, so it was only retrospectively for me, really. I discovered a lot of stuff through them. The guitar solo from Supersonic is just my sweet Lord. But it's interesting how brazen they were about it. Like the cigarettes and alcohol, get it on thing, which they were never sued for. And then, the Imagine thing at the start, Don't Look Back in Anger, which they were never sued for. He's kind of openly said that he's ripped off 2 songs off All the Young Dudes. Bowie never sued him, but then other people did. It's very interesting to me that the way that works, and that it's just down to the person who writes it who goes, yeah, I can't be bothered to sue. It's a bit mean, Everybody rips off stuff. I mean, the thing
true,
is,
everyone does rip off stuff, but he's one of the very few people, because mostly they go, I'm just a conduit to, the celestial heavens full of songs, and I'm the chosen one that downloads this. He goes, I just steal them. I quite admire him for that. Really.
I mean, there is Lennon was a little bit like that. I remember hearing, I think it's on the anthology where he's talking about Please Please Me. And he goes through pretty much bar by bar, and he says, the please bit is Roy Orbison, and then this bit's this, and this bit's that. But yeah, not quite as brazenly as Noel, for sure.
Well, look, we should talk about the songs. We talk about the book, and the book, as I was saying earlier on, it's kind of like apart from the fact it's got some of your old interviews in, it's a kind of Revolution in the Head format, And I suppose the thing that struck me was that Revolution in the Head does have the advantage that those Beatles songs had different songwriters, and they had different instruments, and they had very specific and different subjects and stories attached to each one, different musicians playing on them, And with Oasis, it tends to be the same songwriter and the same musicians and the same kind of context. I just wonder if you found that, and often not specific subjects that you can invest in. There's no being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, or there's no Lovely Rita or whatever. There's no, hell, there's a story here. So, did you find that was restricting in any way?
Well, I kind of found it. I really enjoyed the challenge of finding interesting ways into some of the less fondly remembered songs. I really, really enjoyed. There's a song called Magic Pie on Be Here Now. And I just found myself, because it's got a line in it, there about 1,000 days preparing for 1,000 years, which is nicked from Tony Blair's maiden speech as Labour, as the Labour Prime Minister. And so I started writing about the whole new Labour thing, and Noel going to 10 Downing Street and all that kind of stuff. And so it was an opportunity really to, as you say, sometimes if there's not too much to say musically, you can kind of find an interesting tangent.
No, that's good. Then maybe you should just give us 3 songs or whatever. So Magic Pie would be one, Hamish. So give me couple of other examples of things that you thought were just particularly interesting to write about.
Well, I really enjoyed writing about the song Stop Crying Your Heart Out and how it had this sort of second life, really. It came out on Heathen Chemistry. It was the second single from Heathen Chemistry in 2002. England predictably crashed out of the World Cup earlier than everyone expected around its release. So it was all over the montages of people in England kits crying their eyes out and stuff like that. But then around about 2009, Leona Lewis, who was the winner of X Factor at the time, covered it on her second album. And so digging into that, it's like, how did that happen? Because every other song on the, at that time, she was a huge artist and she had guys like Max Martin, the creme de la creme of professional songwriters. And then right at the end, with like the brackets with 15 different writers. And then at the end, there's just this one song that's just got Noel Gallagher. And she ended up performing on X Factor at the final when she came back as a sort of conquering hero. And then from there, it became this kind of X Factor audition standard where you've got this footage of Harry Styles performing it when he was auditioning to be in One Direction. And then it ends up being this charity single during lockdown, with all kinds of weird people on it. Like I think Kylie's on it and Robbie Williams and all kinds of people where it's sort of flashing past them all in Zoom. And it's almost ended up becoming as ubiquitous as Wonderwall. Leona Lewis says in the book, she says, yeah, God, Simon Cowell must have really liked that one because every time I turn on X Factor, there's someone singing Stop Crying Your Heart Out. So it's kind of, I did it first. But so I found that really interesting that of all songs had why that and not The Back in Anger or Wonderwall or whatever. Is it the same?
Ted, give me an example of one that a couple of you felt strongly about.
Well,
that were fun to write about and had a
when
story.
you get to the back end of Oasis, so you're getting to the last album and you're kind of scrabbling around thinking, God, I wonder what stories are there here? Because I know that Noel was probably struggling a little bit for subject matter then. And as I dug in, I found that there were good stories attached to a lot of the songs. In particular, Ain't Got Nothing of the last album, which is a Liam song. And he'd had it since 2002. And it's based on the story of the last night of Oasis tour in Germany. And they're in a bar in Munich and they're having a few drinks in the very posh hotel bar. And some sort of altercation occurs between Liam's crew, including the security, and they had quite a big security detail, and some local businessmen. Now, they were described as German and Italian businessmen. I don't know what business they were in, but they were extremely handy. And apparently they smashed the entire hotel lobby up, and a platoon of police was sent in, and Liam woke up in custody, missing his front teeth. And for many years after, I
hate it when that happens.
Exactly. Yeah. He was convinced because he had no other marks on his lips that his teeth had been removed by the police and pliers, and they hadn't lost them in the fight. And he wrote this song, Ain't Got Nothing, about this incident. He wrote in 2002, and he was telling people that it was going to be a number one hit. Oasis didn't actually release it for another few years until the last album and To Get Your Soul. And this is the story of that. This is the story of that incident. And what I liked most about it is a few days after he was released from police custody and the hospital, he dedicated Live Forever to his two teeth at a gig in Cardiff. So that was a nice little story to write about.
That's fantastic. So look, where are you going to see them on the reunion? I assume you're both going.
Oh, we're going to be at the first one, of course.
In Cardiff.
Have to be. Yeah. I mean,
it struck me that they are the perfect stadium act. Stadium acts are mostly about spectacle. Bands get bigger and bigger. In order to entertain 80,000 people, they have to throw a load of fireworks at it and a load of pyros and a load of laser beams and backdrops. It's really interesting that group, all they have to do is to get up there and start singing these songs, and 80,000 people will just carry on for them. It's like a giant kind of karaoke.
That's and what's really
no stagecraft involved, no set, no.
Yeah. What's really interesting, I think, is that the way it's become so cross-generational. I mean, if you go on, there's just like lots and lots of, I meet like kids, friends' kids or whatever all the time who are 15 and they're just into it. And one of the impetuses for the book was me and Ted, we went to see Liam play the O2 Arena. He was solo at the time, and he was doing the 30th anniversary of Definitely Maybe in summer of 2024. And we bumped into each other in the pub, and it was we both were just kind of quite staggered by. I think Ted said to me, "Were you on the tube?" He said, "Yeah." And it's like loads and loads of kids, 15, 16-year-olds, all drunk and singing really obscure Oasis songs. And we just, that was one of the reasons. Nobody believes that we started right. The idea came before they got back together, but it did. And that was one of the key kind of things. We thought, wow, there's all these kids. And I remember getting hold of Revolution in the Head when I was 15 or whatever, and just carrying it around. And every time you heard a Beatles song, you would kind of flip through it.
Look it up, yeah.
And I just thought these guys need to know the tales behind these songs. So that was one of the key informers of what we wanted to do. And then obviously, you've got this really beautiful thing where kids, like 15-year-olds, will go to a gig with their dads and they'll both really enjoy it rather than one of them being dragged along. So, I don't think I can't think of too many bands who have managed to do that. I mean, I remember going to see the Stones, for example, when I was 16. And it definitely, there weren't loads of 16-year-olds there. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of, it was very much a kind of nostalgic thing. And there were, there were obviously 16-year-olds at that point into the Stones, but it felt very old sort of crowd, I think.
Well, I think there's a lot of nostalgia with this too. And I personally think there's a lot of nostalgia about the 90s. I think now you look back at the 90s and you think the 90s was just a golden age. It was glorious and everything was possible and everything was moving up and everything was optimistic. And I think that people associate those songs with that particular time. But whatever, it's a fantastically good opportunity to put the book out. The book is called Sound So Very Loud, the inside story of every song Oasis recorded. And it's so nice to talk to you both, Ted Kessler and Hamish MacBain. Thanks so much